Hey guys, it's Bina, and today I want to go over what are my top 10 favorite builds coming up for patch 1.0 of last Epoch, February 21st. So with the release of 1.0 coming up very shortly, I want to go over what are my top 10 favorite builds that I've played so far, and I have one that I haven't played but I find really interesting. So and I have one also that is probably not what you think it would be, and not one of the builds that a lot of people enjoy the most, but it is clearly one of my favorites, and should have some nice little buffs for 1.0 coming with the Falconer class. So maybe you guessed it, maybe not. So let's go straight into the list right now. First of all, let's start with Shaman Thorn Totem. This build plays extremely well, super easy to play, one button build or almost. You can start leveling with it starting at level 4. So one of the pros of this build, basically very starter friendly, very new player friendly. It is very easy on the hands, not much to actually micromanage. It's like you are basically a caster of totems, and those totems are actually minions. They have perfect AI because they are like stationary minions, right? So because they are stationary minions and they just aim at any target that's around them, they don't suffer from the actual movement AI that the game has to offer. If you play a build like Squirrels, if you play any other minion that actually has to move, so you basically benefit from perfect AI. So the build does not have a ton of it's not the best single target DPS, it's not the best at anything, but it's extremely good at everything. So this would definitely be one of my starter of choice coming up with the 1.0 patch. Next up, we have Lightning Swarmblade as a Primalist Druid. Or you could play also the Frostbite version as well. I'll put those two in the same category because they are just like Swarmblade builds. One is a bit more tanky, the other one is way more damage. So if you want to be more tanky, I'd say go for the Lightning Swarmblade. If you want to deal more damage, go for the Frostbite Swarmblade. It's a melee build. It actually scales spell damage if you go with the Lightning Swarmblade, or Frostbite if you go for the Frostbite Swarmblade. So one is the spell and one is dots. Both rely on a certain form of CC for their main form of defense. So lightning will stun, Frostbite will freeze. Both are extremely fun to play. It's probably the most fun melee class to play in my opinion. So this is coming from, obviously, from what I have played. The Lightning Swarmblade also scales dodge like crazy because your Armblade Slash actually uses the Serpent Strike tree. So you get up to crazy amount of dodge percentage based on having almost no investments. So you get some flat mainly from your Maelstrom stacks. So you always have Frenzy and a Haste and dodge and stun chance from your Maelstroms. So essentially this build plays, you hold dive to basically stack Maelstrom as much as possible. You melee attack enemies. You stack tornadoes on you, which will in turn apply some lightnings and cast some storm orbs, and like basically you're scaling your tornado to deal damage, but you play as a melee character. Really fun, really strong. This one requires a little bit more gear than the Shaman Thorn Totem to start, but as soon as you get good weapons, you're ready to go basically. Next up, we have the Beastmaster Squirrel build. This is one of the best single target build in the entire game. It plays so well against bosses. It's absolutely amazing. It can absolutely destroy Tier 4 Julra or any dungeon boss. Also, when using the Apogee Sword, you can actually freeze monsters constantly around you as you map in the echoes. So that, alongside the experimental affix on your belt to summon a volatile zombie and one of the zombie rings, you can actually have a volatile zombie constantly dying and keep getting all of your stacks for Frozen Vengeance, which allow you to freeze all non-rare or boss enemies on any melee hit. So basically, you always have these stacks, you leap into packs of enemies, freezing them all and killing them pretty much instantly because your squirrels deal so much damage. Really fun build to play, highly recommend. Flame Wraiths. Flame Wraiths is one of the best builds in the entire game to push corruption with, just because mechanically they deal so much damage. They are stationary turrets. Basically, you're playing turret defense with these guys. They have perfect AI as well because they are stationary, and they just keep shooting at an incredibly high pace any target in range. And range, they have a lot of. On this build, you almost don't build any resistances because you get most of it from just channeling on your Wraiths. You get all of your resistances there, you heal from doing so with Drain Life. Your Wraiths are also tremendously buffed with Dreadshade. There are many ways to play this build. Some play it with a Stationary Abomination, some play with Volatile Zombies, some play, there's many ways, but ultimately it comes down to this build mechanically is just extremely strong. Keep in mind, this build requires idols to be able to be played optimally, because you would want to have your Wraiths always summon a Flame Wraith and not just summon a regular melee Wraith. So you need to have the adorned idols that give you plus percentage chance to summon a Flame Wraith instead of just a regular Wraith. This does not mean that you cannot start playing this build earlier, although you will only unlock its full potential once you have these idols. Highly recommend. Next up, we have Shadow Daggers Bladedancer. I love this build. This is my favorite way of leveling any rogue. Shadow Daggers is it's a skill that does not have a skill tree, but it is not a sub-skill, and it actually scales off of melee throwing with an insane amount of added damage effectiveness to it. It always crits, and it's just incredibly powerful all throughout the story and the endgame. It can also scale incredibly well. Morning Frost Boots, for example, can double dip on Shadow Daggers because it scales with both melee and throwing, so that any dexterity that you have can actually give you 2 flat instead of only 1. Extremely good build if you want to play like a fast ninja-like, dashing all around, explosions, killing everything, high damage potential. Basically, this build has almost no downside. It's incredibly good. It's one of the fastest mapper in the entire game, and I absolutely love playing Shadow Daggers Bladedancer. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Especially for newer players, if you just want to destroy the game, this will absolutely wreck everything. All right. Next up, we have the Judgement Aura Paladin build. So this is a build that I have played recently. It's really, really fun to play. Really good at actually keeping you on your toes all the time, since you will want to use all of your mana with your Judgement that gets increased damage. Well, not increased, but more damage based on how much mana you consume. So you're a mana stacker that consumes all of your mana, and then you cast Volatile Reversal, and then you start lunging back forward or shield rushing. So there are a couple of ways that you can actually play this, either with shield rush, either with lunge, or with javelin, with like dashing to your javelin as well. But this is like the perfect, it's the perfect build to transition from using Holy Trail javelin. When I was playing it, I was dealing over 60k ticks per just as running around. This is kind of like the RF build of last Epoch. So you just run around, things dies around you, and yeah, you just win. Absolutely broken, absolutely amazing, great DPS. So one nice particularity about this build is that it scales your damage with your healing effectiveness, right? So healing effectiveness every 5% will give you 1 flat damage, and also attunement gives you, it has an attunement scaling that also gives you healing effectiveness on top of giving you increased damage, and attunement also gives you mana. So attunement actually scales all of your ways to deal damage by giving you more mana, more flat damage, and more increased damage, right? So very, very, very interesting build, interesting itemization. There's multiple different possibilities. I highly suggest playing Judgement Aura Paladin. It is one of my favorite Sentinel build for sure. Going on to the Runemaster. Currently on this patch, Runemaster is absolutely broken with having access to permanent Flame Ward through Frostwall, permanent Cold Fire Cold Invocation. It just gets so much damage reduction. It gets so much ward. It's absolutely crazy. One of my favorite, Frostbite Frostclaw. I have played this one for quite a bit. It is really, really fun and fast casting. It's not the fastest mapper, so you'll not be the fastest one ever, but you'll have incredibly high damage and also incredibly good tankiness. Just by being a Runemaster, basically, you almost win the game with your mastery selection. Frostbite Frostclaw will actually scale Frostbite, which is an element, so you're trying to get as much damage over time as possible. So there is an affix which is elemental damage over time, which you will try to stack as much of as possible, because it just, the raw numbers on that affix are just way higher than anything else. It's just like super, super efficient to get. So Frostbite Runemaster, highly recommended as well. Another Runemaster build here would be the Plasma Orb Runemaster. This is one that I've played recently. This thing absolutely slaps. Keep in mind that anything that you would use with invocations, currently as of patch 0.9, you are dealing way too much damage because the node that gives you elemental penetration per intelligence is giving you too much. About how much? Maybe about 7 times more than intended. We assume will be fixed for 1.0. I think the build will still be very good, and it will still push very high, but it will not be as good as it is on live, and you might itemize a little bit differently. Overall, Plasma Orb, you have these orbs circling around you, so the orb itself does fire damage, but what we're really scaling is the actual lightning electrocution that it does, and that is lightning damage. So you want to stack as much intelligence alongside the Mad Alchemist Ladle and try to apply as many elements on monsters as possible. That will give you a huge multiplier, as well as using Morning Frost with Dexterity to try to stack even more flat damage so that it's increased by the Mad Alchemist Ladle. This is just a build that is overall like extremely good. It is one of the best, if not the best build at the moment in the game, although utilizing a bug. Even so, I think in 1.0 it's still going to be really good, and I would highly recommend trying it out once 1.0 releases. Next up, we have the Nova Hammerden Paladin. This build is absolutely incredible. The amount of range that those hammers have is just insane. It probably clears like 2 or 3 screens away from you, and it's just, you can scale the damage of your hammers quite well as your tankiness. And just because of the mechanics of the actual skill, it's incredibly good for doing arena. It's good for clearing monoliths. It's not the best and highest single target DPS, but it still does it. Overall, this is a build that I have not played, but it is one of my favorites because I just know for a fact that this is one of the mechanically best skill in the game at this moment. So I highly recommend trying it out if you haven't. There are multiple different setups that you could use. Yeah, it's just, I think in 1.0, hammers are still going to be absolutely broken, and they're just going to be always a fun way to play any Paladin build. Now, for the last build that I have here, we have the Bladedancer Ballista. Yes, you've heard it here. Bladedancer Ballista. Why is this one of my favorite builds? Well, it's not because it's one of the best. It's not because it's just that I have something for those turret builds that I just love. And with the upcoming changes to Falconer, so we might see some very interesting things coming up for Ballista. We have access to some base critical strike chance. We have access to some flat damage. We have now access to transforming our critical strike avoidance into some critical strike multiplier for our minions. So we are going to see some more, a little bit more damage on Ballista. And if we can get this high enough, I think Ballista might be a good choice for 1.0. So I would heavily suggest keeping an eye out at the reveal for Falconer on February 8th that we're going to have on Max Roll, and see if there's anything that comes up in terms of synergies in the skills that could benefit our Ballista. Overall, I've always played this build. Every single patch, I make at least one Ballista character, and I always have a lot of fun with it. It is quite squishy, but mechanically, as I said, anything that is like a stationary minion with perfect AI will always be pretty good. This pretty much wraps it up. These are my top 10 favorite builds. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite builds are, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.